Hello and welcome everyone to the Morbid Moonlight at the Movies. Today we're going to be taking a look at a film released by Shudder with an almost entirely British cast, and that film is a weird, gooey sci-fi black comedy horror film called The Seed, which is the feature debut of director Sam Walker. So, this is a film that, like so many others that come out these days, where I really found myself struggling with the urge to want to see all the characters here gruesomely murdered, or better yet, killed off screen before the film even starts, just so I wouldn't have to see or hear them or to spend any time with them. The characters in question are this group of three young women who are all your typical super entitled vapid narcissists who spend most of the film being sarcastic, complaining and or arguing. They conform to roughly the original Halloween template in that one of them is made out to be more of the nerdy nonconformist, whilst the other two are more trendy and selfish and unlikable, although one of them is made out to be this insanely cartoonish super bitch, maybe in an effort to kind of draw fire away from the other two and make them seem more likeable. So our group of, and I don't want to say heroines, but main characters I suppose, they're going out to this posh holiday home in the middle of the Mojave Desert because there's this special meteor shower taking place, and being of the current generation, they want not just to see it, but to use it as an opportunity to create content for their social media. Things start to go wrong quite soon though, and before we know it, a meteor has crash landed, or they think it's a meteor, and it has brought with it this cute little alien creature. And pretty soon, the lives of our trio are completely upended as weird shit starts to happen to them. So, is The Seed any good? Well, my first big problem with this film is that I cannot stand the characters, even the one that's heavily signposted to be our final girl, because she's kind of made to be less obviously disgustingly selfish and narcissistic than the other two. I really have trouble connecting with characters from that phone-obsessed, always on social media, totally phony baloney generation, because they represent pretty much anti-humanity, this total absence of any recognisably human traits, and just this horrible, glassy-eyed, selfish, everything's a performance, consumerism worship zombies. Therefore, in most cases, unless you're specifically setting out to do a really savage satire, which sadly this film isn't, despite some kind of crude lip service to the contrary, then you're dealing not just with cliches, but with characters that it's impossible to recognise as even being human beings, because it's totally impossible to empathise with them on any level, because that whole culture is just so divorced from any kind of meaningful emotions. And in this case, the characterisations of the social media horror characters in The Seed are so over the top and extreme that you never get any kind of a decent look at who they are beyond their need to perform for their followers. And that's really not a great foundation to build a film on. The Seed is a film that you can carve up into three basic chunks, beginning, middle and end. The beginning, the first act, is setting up our characters and their situation, which really means setting up the playing field for the rest of the film. That means showing us what these characters are like, usually by way of very basic post-it note sketches of "I'm a caricatured social media junkie, therefore you should hate me," or "I've got an old phone and I read books, therefore I'm a social outcast." The main thing we're establishing in this act isn't so much the characters or who they are, but their relationship to technology and social media, with one of them being very much addicted to it all, one being totally opposed to it all, and the other one being somewhere in the middle. We don't really learn much about them as human beings, and their interactions with each other tend to be just them talking about themselves, which manages to keep us pretty firmly on the outside of them as a group, and leaves us to either take a dislike to them, which is pretty easy to do, or else just to be intoxicated by the fact that they're all very, very hot. Which, sadly, is also pretty easy to do, because the first half of this film is all shot like a travel advert. It's a film about pretty people, looking gorgeous, but being really, really annoying. So the other boxes to tick are that once we get the idea that these women can't live without their phones, that their phones are then going to go on the blink pretty soon, and that they're going to be stuck out in this one location where nearly all of the rest of the film will take place. And ticking boxes is a pretty fair assessment, because it's really done in this very perfunctory way, just so as we can get on with the story. But bear in mind how much time we spent on the fact that these girls are here just to get clicks, and how that's the most important thing in their lives. Because that appears to be the main thematic idea that's being set up as to what this entire film is going to be about. Then, middle of the film, second act, the meteor drops, the women encounter the little alien creature, and we get conflict in our pretty carefree group, which means, basically, a lot of arguing. Now, the setup of this situation is that our trio are stranded out here without any phone signal, and an alien crash lands in their midst, forcing them to deal with it, rather than doing the obvious things like calling the police, or going to get help, or just plain running away. Now that's well and good. Stranding characters in the middle of nowhere with no phone signal is just something that has to be done in horror films of the post-mobile phone era. What I've got more of a problem with in this middle chunk is that because we need to move these characters towards where they need to be for the end of the film to happen, they're required to make a series of insane choices and to act like no human being would ever act. First off, the meteor crash lands in the pool, then they see it's got a face, soon they see that it's not a meteor, it's actually a little creature, then they assume it's an armadillo, then they assume it's dead because it's not moving, then they just leave it without investigating further, then they go off and do a whole bunch of drugs, then they pay somebody to get rid of it, then he doesn't but they're not too bothered, then they just completely ignore it, and all the while it's growing bigger. This goes on for a very, very long time, and to me, it's pretty hard to buy into, because this little fella obviously isn't an armadillo or any other animal of this earth, and he's crash landed on top of you from out of the heavens. But none of our gang ever make the obvious leap and suggest that the dude's an alien, because the film's just not quite ready for that to happen. So the middle of the film is a lot of holding off going from point A to point B, which slows things down. And there are no real other characters, much less any more development of the trio that we've actually got. To be honest, the whole middle chunk of the seed is more or less entirely stagnant, except for a few nasty scenes, like where they're talking about killing the little creature, that only serve to make us hate these characters even more than we already do. The final third is where things finally happen, and because the world of this film is so small, consisting of basically one location, 3 characters and not much else, it pretty much uses up all that it can do very quickly. It's in the final act that you can really gauge whether or not it's been worth the journey, because you get a chance to see exactly what it is that this film's trying to do and what it's got to say for itself. And the sad truth is that that's really not much at all. To me, there's 2 basic kind of stories that you can tell about aliens that land on Earth. Either they're monsters and they're trying to kill us, as in something like The Deadly Spawn, or else they're cute and cuddly, and it's actually the humans that are made out to be the evil ones, like in E.T. The Seed tries something else by saying that the alien is cute and cuddly, but ultimately up to no good. So the end result of that is that even though it's really obvious which one of the 3 is going to end up as the final girl, it's really her better qualities, specifically her compassion, that's the cause of all the mayhem here, and that the group would probably have fared much better if they hadn't indulged that compassion in the first place, which, to be honest, is a pretty scummy message to have in your film. Because even though the other 2 who end up as victims are presented as totally cartoonish parodies of Gen Z narcissists, this isn't a film where they're ultimately presented as characters deserving of retribution. So after all the seemingly satirical build-up, we get absolutely zero payoff. It just ends in this kind of splashy, spurty, gooey gore effects blowout. Now some of that stuff's fun if you're into that sort of thing, which I admit I am. I think some of the weird artsy moments actually show off Sam Walker's talents as a guy who's probably best at doing just purely visual stuff rather than dealing with characters or plot. I think The Seed is really held back by a lot of character problems, a really bland and uninteresting setup that goes nowhere until the last 20 minutes or so, and just this real lack of any emotional investment in anything that's going on. It's not fun enough that you can enjoy the splashy effects. It's not smart enough to be satirical or to skewer these cartoonish archetypes in a clever way that's got anything to say. It's not well written enough that you can see past huge logical gaps. But most importantly, the characters are so self-absorbed and emotionally distant that you never get a chance to care about anything that happens to them. So you can say that it's well shot, or that the music's cool, or that there's some very bold, vibrant and memorable imagery in it, but those are all things that only really amount to anything if they're in service of a decent overall finished product. I think that the best that you can say about The Seed is that it's a competently put together film with this bold visual style to it that really completely fails as a piece of entertainment. It's just totally hollow with a very distant, cynical approach to all the better qualities of humanity, but also doesn't really get that excited when it comes to stuff that, in a different film, you might think of as the fun stuff, the scenes where you get to go a little bit crazy, and those scenes, the effect scenes, are treated in the same perfunctory fashion, because none of it means anything. That's why having a film that looks like it's a whiskey advert isn't a good thing. It's all just surface flash, where every image is treated with the same weight, without the slightest understanding of emotions, or why one scene should be treated more importantly than the next. Everything is filmed in such a way just to simply sell each image to us, whether it's a beautiful woman, a landscape, or a gore effect. And at the end of the day, it's all just this series of images that mean absolutely nothing. So I think that The Seed isn't a great film by any means, but weirdly, I also didn't totally hate it, even though I think it's got a lot more cons than it has pros. There is some stuff in the last half hour that will probably stick with you just on a purely visual level. And to be honest, the cast are all incredibly beautiful, and are all filmed in such a way as to desperately try and distract you from the lack of anything going on. But it's just hard to really escape that feeling that none of this matters, and a good judge of this comes from asking yourself after you've seen a film, do you think you could sit down and watch that again? And thinking back over the journey that this film goes on, no, I really couldn't, because nothing pays off and it just ends in this typical messy, ugly splat of gore that I don't think it's really worth sitting through the loathsome character scenes in order to get to. Therefore, I'm going to rate The Seed on a technical level of simply how good a film is it at a 4.5 out of 10. Below average, 100%, but compared to a lot of other films that are coming out, definitely this year at least, the good thing is that at least this is a film that's not afraid to be colourful and breezy and sexy and a little bit strange, rather than just this horrible, dull, miserable grey sludge, which seems to have become the flavour of the month in horror right now. In terms of pure personal enjoyment, I'd say it's probably closer to being a 3.5 really, but I can see that objectively it's a little bit better than that. It's just that I personally have got a very low tolerance for those kind of characters, and for films that spit on compassion and humanity and have that kind of blasé, we're all just meat attitude that really annoys me. I've definitely seen worse films, but the more I think about The Seed, the more that colourful, sexy sci-fi sparkle kind of fades, and the less I like it. So maybe it's best that I stop thinking about it before that rating gets any lower.